now in the roundtable we have the different points of view. We have from one side the point of view which is very close related to what Franco was presenting, which is the analysis from the approach of cultural policy, explicit or implicit cultural policy, and how they are related to urban and social policies. And Tony Murphy will follow what Franco was introducing. So I will ask him to be the first to talk. Tony Murphy is the director of Culturalink Consultants. It is a consultant department unit based in the Canarian Islands, but working very close as well with the University of Valencia and in network with many other centers around. And Tony has a very, very large experience as a cultural policy consultant and a person who tries to break the conventional way of analyzing cultural policy. So I think, and that's why I will ask him to be the first to speak, because I think it will be very close to what Franco was introducing in his keynote speech. After him, I will ask Louise Haxthausen from UNESCO and Kaisa Beckström from Statistics Finland to have the floor, because I think some people like them are doing a very interesting work on trying to go starting from the analysis of statistical data and collecting data, how we can assess the social impact of culture, and not only the social impact, but all the impacts that the cultural projects could give, and trying to do that in a quite complex environment, because all these analyses are highly dependent of local context. So in which way statistical data can be used, and how we use quantitative and qualitative indicators. I think their experience could be very useful, especially because one is more based in statistics, the other one is has maybe a larger approach. So I think both could outline quite a lot our attempt to try to discuss from a methodological point of view how we can measure the social dimension of culture. And me personally, what I will do is I will introduce one of the methodological frameworks used by the MESOC project, which is focused on the assessment of social impact from a specific city cultural project. So one of the things that we are doing is analyzing pilot cases in the different cities in Europe and try to see which kind of impact they can get. And I will try to introduce a framework, a methodological framework, in order to allow to understand how we can go from the analysis of the resources so the idea is how projects based on explicit goals, how we can analyze the efficient use of the available resources, how important is well-defined strategy and programs, and in order to be able to analyze and to assess the effective achievement of project outcomes, and finally, societal impact long-term results. So that will be a little bit the trial that we want to do. The idea is to have a small presentation by each of us, and after that, open the dialogue among us. So I will ask Tony to start first, and after Tony, I will ask Louise and Kaiser to just introduce their thoughts. So Tony, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lluís. It's a pleasure to share this roundtable with all of you. My brief and very restrictive intervention, I find it related to what Franco Bianchini has exposed now. It has to be that way because I am a fervent reader of his work during the years, but only I am responsible of my interpretation of his work. So Mr. Bianchini has no responsibility whatsoever of what I'm going to say. As I said, I'm going to restrict the focus of my intervention in accordance with what I have discussed with Louise in our preparatory conversations over the last few days. And this will be basically the idea. I think I've got 5 minutes. Let me begin with an introductory statement, and that is conventional cultural policies are generally socially relevant. That said, from a transitional perspective, I would like to suggest that a potentially fruitful area to address the evaluation and overcoming of the important deficits in terms of social impact of conventional cultural policies could be addressed through the critical review of the role of the physical network that supports such cultural policies and defines their limits and potential, and that constitutes the fixed element in the short and medium term. I am referring to the critical examination of the relationship between cultural policy and cultural facilities policy, or the building of the other policy that determines cultural the building of cultural ventures and cultural spaces. The idea underlying this approach is that urban cultural policies and policies for the creation of cultural spaces and facilities are governed by the same logic and are articulated in a functional whole within the dominant paradigm of cultural policy, in which cultural spaces are both the derivative and the condition of the failed model of cultural democratization. Although it is not possible to establish a perfect correlation between models of cultural policy and models of cultural facilities or spaces, cultural spaces are, to a large extent, the keystone of the ineffective, inefficient, and inequitable policies of cultural democratization, insofar as they constitute the main tool for their effective materialization. In other words, on the one hand, cultural spaces determine to a large extent the conditions of possibility for the effective realization of the cultural rights of citizenship, and on the other, they are physical and symbolic nodes that determine the articulation of local cultural ecosystems. If this is so, it is worth, in my opinion, to considering that a redefinition of the role and models of use and management of urban cultural spaces could have the potential to reformulate, to some degree, urban cultural policies in a more effective, efficient, and equitable way. This necessarily leads us to reflect on the functionalities of cultural spaces situated in the tension between the individual perspective and the need for a context conducive to the development of cultural and creative process. Cultural spaces, in short, and as context, basically fulfill 3 types of functionalities in relation to the cultural, creative, and innovative processes that can take place in them. They act as providers of resources, as providers of symbolic functions, and as providers of operational functions. In practice, however, cultural spaces and facilities are limited in most cases to a role of restricted provision of resources, mainly physical capital, financial capital, and symbolic capital, with little mobilization of relational and formative capital. And here lies one of their main shortcomings in terms of impact and capacity to activate social transformation processes. In order to fulfill their functions as facilitating environments and as tools for social empowerment and activation of the urban cultural ecosystem, in terms of equitable distribution of cultural capacities, cultural spaces must effectively and efficiently deploy all of their functions as providers of resources, I am referring to the function of supplying, of course, physical capital, financial capital, relational capital, formative capital, and the symbolic capital. Their semiotic functions, including storytelling, identification and certification of processes, and value generation, as well as their operational functions. In this case, I'm referring to the interface function of cultural spaces, determined by features such as usability, communication and visibility, efficiency, porosity and interweaving, and transformative impact. I finish off suggesting that this could be one of the parts worth exploring in order to overcome the sterility of current cultural policies in terms of social cultural transformation.
Thank you very much, Tony. You were very synthetic. Thank you. Because we are a little bit late and I want to have some space for dialogue after our presentation. Louise, do you want to start with your presentation?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, perfect.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much to you and all the organizing team for giving this opportunity to present to you and the UNESCO's work in trying to measure social impact of culture. I'm going to try to share a presentation. I hope I will have luck on this.
You are much luckier than me. Yes, I think it works.
Excellent.
Yes, perfect. Perfect.
Here we are. Okay, so when we at UNESCO talk about measuring the impact of culture and development, we very much focus on the Sustainable Development Goals, the so-called 2030 agenda. As you may know, this is a very ambitious development agenda, which the international committee, meaning here all member states of the UN, committed to in 2015. It is an ambitious agenda because, as you can see here on the right, you have all the different Sustainable Development Goals listed. So we have 70 goals in all, and it's about people, prosperity, and planet. So it's a very, again, comprehensive approach. And to each of these goals are linked more specific targets. And the underpinning principle of all these goals of this agenda is to leave no one behind, meaning addressing vulnerabilities and promote equalities. Here we go. So, as you may have seen, among these different goals, you may have looked for a specific goal in relation to culture. Well, there's none. And that is not an omission. Unfortunately, UNESCO and a number of member states advocated for a specific goal, but this did not materialize. And one of the reasons, and I think this is also interesting in the context of the debate you are having today, a main reason was a lack of evidence of how concretely culture contributes to sustainable development. So, you know, for this not to become a vicious circle, we thought that we could take the absence of a specific goal on culture as an opportunity and really try to look at how culture contributes transversely to sustainable development to all these different goals. And to try to measure that, UNESCO has developed thematic indicators for culture. And the whole idea of these indicators, we're talking about, you know, at what level you actually measure the impact culture at program level, at city level, and so on. Here, the ambition is to measure this at national level and at urban level, at city level. Now, what is the rationale behind this? There are several things that UNESCO would like to address by developing these indicators. And it's basically, first and foremost, to support local, national, and international policy making on culture for sustainable development by creating and showing the linkages. It's also to advocate, and that's more in the longer term at the international level within the UN, for the role of culture in sustainable development, so that hopefully when we have the next international agenda for development, culture will be fully recognized and explicitly recognized in such an agenda. And then it's simply within common, the 2030 agenda, to monitor progress, to allow for states within the existing reporting mechanism there is on the 2030 agenda to report on the specific contribution that culture makes to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So what is the methodology we have developed for these indicators? Rather than going Sustainable Development Goal by Sustainable Development Goal and looking at what each goal, what is the contribution of culture to each specific goal, we are trying with this to have a more thematic approach. And the thematic approach is around 4 pillars, 4 themes. The first one is environment resilience, as you can see it here. We very much deal with all the aspects related to climate change, to the environment. The second one is around prosperity and livelihoods, very much looking at the economic contribution of culture to sustainable development. The third one is around knowledge and skills, and I think here we could add also in innovation. So it's basically how culture contributes also to a more broad education goals in terms of developing education. And the fourth theme is about inclusion and participation, very much looking at issues of governance, of human rights, both in terms of artistic freedoms, of cultural participation. Right now, with the support of the European Union and Sweden, UNESCO is piloting these indicators in 6 countries, 2 in Europe, Portugal and Romania, 2 in Africa, Burkina Faso and Morocco, and then also Costa Rica and Vietnam. And again, the piloting will be done both at national level, so at a country level, but also at urban level, so most probably in the capital of these different countries. I would like to insist in conclusion on the fact that this is very much a pilot. So before rolling out this more broadly, the idea is to learn from these pilots. And I think, you know, the methodologies, different methodologies that we are discussing here today would also be an extremely valuable input for UNESCO's work to further refine this framework of indicators. So I think I'll up here, Louise, at this stage, and then we can discuss further during our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Louise. So we don't have a lot of time, so we will need to go a little bit pushing us. But in any case, please, Kasia, may you just, the floor is yours. Please try to be as synthetic as possible. Thank you. Kaisa? We don't listen to you. Maybe there is a problem with the microphone. Do you listen us? No, but we are not listening you. Well, what I will do in the midterm is just I will try to introduce a little bit some other ideas of myself in the meantime that we are waiting for Cassia. So what I want to share with you is this other approach. So we had this much political orientation approach, and I want to share with you some of the methodological schemes that we are using in the MESOC project in order to analyze from a bottom-up approach from pilot projects. So we are developing, and tomorrow, as you could see, if you continue being in our workshop, we will present many different cases coming from 10 different cities, the cities that are part of our project. But I want just to share with you some of the frameworks of that. And I will focus myself now only on one of them. There are many because we are working with different methodologies in order to have a larger approach. So if we focus ourselves on specific projects, which is different than when we try to focus ourselves on the impact of an explicit cultural policy, because I think it's important to see the difference, because projects could be as a result of an explicit cultural policy, or could be as an implicit policy that allows that civil society organize themselves and they do their own projects, even though with little direct budget. So in this case, we try to analyze what happens, how we can go and how we can build.
Louise, can you please zoom in a bit because nobody can read.
Okay, yes, just a second. That's true. Maybe now it's better.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So what in this slide, what we try to explain is that we try to collect different outcomes, social outcomes coming from the three areas that we are analyzing. So our project, as Pau explained this morning, focus on the well-being and health impact, or in the participation and empowering of people, or in the in a more urban approach analysis. So we try to analyze the impacts in these three areas, but we also wanted to see in which way the impact is more individual, it's more communitarian, or is more territorial. And we tried to see and to analyze different typologies of programs, from co-design, co-creation, co-production, co-programming, networking, art therapies, art education practices, etc., etc., etc. So we work in a large variety of projects, and these projects organize activities. So from exhibition, training courses, art residences, atelier visits, internship, publications, workshops, debates, etc., etc., etc. So these are the outputs. And what we want to see, taking into account that each local context is different, and we are looking for indicators that could explain the results, the outcomes achieved through these projects, and finally, the kind of long-term impacts. We try to analyze what happens with specific target groups, and which are the kind of impacts that we could develop. So we organize a system like this, and we are now at this very moment just starting from our side in the University of Barcelona, and the University, the Polytechnic of Milano is doing a parallel approach, trying to get information for a more political approach, for a more urban approach. So that is a little bit how we are complementary, our research is complementary, using the same pilot cases. We try to do our best in order to understand the kind of impact, no? And the idea is to try to find, for one side, the the impact indicators, so how a specific project outcomes linked to the outputs that the projects are delivering, how this can be analyzed in a more societal impact approach, so in a more long-term approach. So the idea is that we can analyze process indicators, how the resource, for instance, the organization of human resources in a way or in another way could develop better products, better outputs, and how these outputs, and here is when the role of the result indicators, how these outputs get specific outcomes. So achieve the goals that we'll try to do. And finally, how these specific outcomes of each one of the projects can be transformed on societal impacts. So impacts who go beyond the specific project. So impacts that are a benefit, a societal benefit. And that's a little bit the kind of approach that we are trying to develop at this very moment. So using specific cases in order to try to understand and try to see in which way the context explains things, or in which way we can find a set of typologies of indicators that could be used in different contexts for different target groups and in different kind of situations and cities. So that's a little bit what I wanted to share with you. Tomorrow we will explain much more, but I wanted to explain this because I think that we can do all the things together. So we can be analyzing the cultural policies and how cultural policies are changing and changed during the last decades with a much more sensitive approach on the social impact. We could analyze that from a more critical approach like Tony Murphy was doing in the sense of trying to understand how are the internal logics of the governmental bodies and how the societal stakeholders react to that. We can do that from the point of view that Louise just explained. So in relation to a general framework, so the how UNESCO tries to do, but even in their case, trying to analyze the context, because the context of Vietnam is not the same as the context of Portugal or the context of the different countries that they try to see if this development impacts are achieved. So this is a macro approach, and we try to complement this macro approach with a more micro approach. And I think that's a little bit what we try to do in this project. So I don't know if now we have our...
Louise, I think Keisa is trying to restart the computer. Okay. So maybe we can wait one minute to see if she manages to rejoin us.
Okay,
and
so
if you want to conclude the round, then
yeah, maybe what I will ask is, Franco, after listening us, may you just how do you react to what we are presenting? It fits with what you said before? How do you feel? You have to turn on the microphone. Yes.
Well, I'm just reacting to Tony Murphy's presentation, a very, very stimulating synthetic presentation earlier. I would say I completely agree with him that that the process is already changing in terms of the functions of cultural buildings, but it seems to me to be left far too much to the discretion of the individual organizations, and in a way, you know, it happens if you're lucky, if you happen to have good leadership in particular institutions, but this is not the norm. And the enormous power that some cultural institutions have today to maintain this level of autonomy is to some extent a problem, because that I think it is entirely true what he was saying earlier, that their contribution is often restricted, and there's absolutely no doubt that if we are entering now a phase of reconstruction, what Tony calls the semiotic and the operational features of these building-based cultural institutions are absolutely central. Because if we don't have an active role in what he called, storytelling, for example, or indeed validation, we are likely to end up with a kind of reconstruction where cultural considerations play a relatively minor role. I would also say that in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals and in relation to social impact generally, we need to be much more imaginative about the content of this, of the activities, the programming of these cultural institutions. And we need to recognize that the definition of culture by young people particularly is changing. And for example, whether we like it or not, gaming, for instance, is a big part of what constitutes culture for young people. We should not be surprised if the participation of young people in traditionally conceived programs of cultural institutions, traditional festivals, and even the European Capital of Culture or the national Capital of Culture initiatives is relatively low. So we need what I hinted at in my presentation, this process of empowerment of young leaders. Young leadership programs is absolutely crucial. And for example, I'm very interested in the way in which the boundaries between sport and arts are increasingly being blurred, and how campaigners like the French rapper Haxthausen, for instance, have been arguing for different kinds of cultural centers, different kinds of cultural institutions, which offer arts, sport, but also hybrids, things which are neither art nor sport. It's very difficult to decide if things like skateboarding or urban exploration is, for example, a form of sport or a form of art. So, so I think we need much more imagination and much more youthful leadership. Otherwise, the transition is not going to happen, basically. Yeah.
Thank you, Franco. I don't know if Cassia is here again, or she's not yet with us.
She's not. Maybe she had some technical issues.
Yeah, well, that is the the risk of this kind of e-workshops. So we depend on the connection. Louise, may you just react, maybe waiting for Cassia, that so how do you see our approaches? Because from the point of view of UNESCO, maybe you have a very macro level approach. How you go down to these more micro approaches?
Thank you, Louise. To respond to this, and maybe to go back to also something Franco just mentioned, that there's a natural tendency somehow to neglect monitoring the role of culture in our social endeavors, whatever, being it at the project at whatever level. I think with this indicator framework that we have developed, what we are trying to do is to provide an incentive and a methodology to report on that. In this particular case, not so much at the program level, but at a higher, let's say, at a city level or at national level. Because the 2030 Agenda Framework comes with an obligation by all member states to report regularly on progress towards the achievements of each of the SDGs. Now, as there's no SDG on culture, many countries actually came to us and said, we believe in the contribution of culture to sustainable development, but we don't know how to report on it in the context of the SDGs, apart from a few specific targets which relate explicitly to culture. So you know, we need an incentive to do that, and we need a methodology. And I think this is what we're trying to do. I think all these different initiatives, the one that we have with these thematic indicators, the one that you have been mentioning, Louise, and also you, Franco, all go in the same direction at the end of the day. The point is really to explore what has not been sufficiently explored in the past, which is all these different interlinkages at various levels between culture and development. I found something very interesting in your methodology, Louise, which is that you look at the same time by picking these three areas: health and well-being, people engagement and participation, urban and territorial renovation. You look at the same time, and I would be interested actually in knowing how you link the three at very individual, personal impact, and impact at the level of communities, and then more institutional impacts also. And how you link the three of them, that would be something I would find very interesting. And I think that type of approach is, first of all, very new, but also makes a lot of sense when it comes to measuring color. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. I really invite you and all, of course, all the attenders to attend tomorrow, because tomorrow morning we will work with many cases, and of course the idea is to following in this direction in the next month. So we will be in touch, by sure, and we will be able to learn together, because that's the great thing of being this large academic community. Well, I think that we still have problems of connection with Kaisa. So I will just give the last word to Tony Murphy if he wants to say something in reaction to what Franco and Luis said. And we will conclude here, because we have our next guest, our next keynote speech, Pierluigi Sacco. So that's why, if you just can say something, Tony, your first reaction of what we said.
Well, Luis, we haven't got time, so I won't. I'll reserve some of the questions that the previous participants have made me think about. I'd just like to ask Franco for a question. Is that possible? Just ask him about. In your last, at the end of your last slide about the new cultural policy agenda, you asked the question: does the capital of culture format have a future? You just mentioned it in passing again in your second intervention. Could you, is that a rhetoric question, or do you have an answer?
Yeah, no, I think it does have a future. That the signs are that the response has been imaginative in many cases. Of course, it has been a little bit of a shock, and I feel very sorry for places like Galway and Rijeka, for example, but despite the extension to the end of April 2021, it's terrible to have worked so hard for many years to win the competition, and then, you know, the number of visitors is extremely small. I think, nevertheless, what the pandemic is showing is that some elements of the European capital of culture are very important, like the fact that it has to be integrated with a long-term strategy for the city, a long-term cultural strategy, and I would say the European Union should emphasize even more a long-term urban strategy, and at its best, which is nearly always, in fact, at least the European capital of culture stimulates a discussion about the future of the city, the cultural future of the city, connected with the other types of future. The big problem which we need to reflect on has been, to some extent, a problem of censorship, has been a problem of fear in some cases. In this debate has happened, but because the weight of expectations in some European capitals of culture and other national capitals of culture is so enormous, it's almost impossible to contemplate the possibility of at least partial failure, of something not going as well as the policymakers desire. And I think that is entirely counterproductive. We need to be much more honest, to use the language of Eleonora Belfiore, who quotes the American philosopher Henry Frankfurt. We need to go beyond the bullshit. If we continue to hype this particular cultural mega events and deny the possibility of something going wrong, if we don't really have a real dialogue between the different stakeholders, then the European Capital of Culture, like many other cultural mega events, has no future. I think it's absolutely absurd that some of these events are already declared a huge success even before they happen. You know, we cannot have that. So we need a much more honest attitude and more respect for the poor evaluators and researchers who find themselves in this unenviable position of having to say that it's not all good and wonderful, that there are some problems, that we need to adopt much more inclusive leadership models, that you cannot parachute little groups of experts from another city into a European capital of culture or a national capital of culture and expect them to have a legacy. That legacy cannot be an afterthought, that it is the most important thing, that it has to pervade the whole program. Otherwise, you have these wonderful statements about increases in self-confidence and social capital that, as I said earlier, that evaporate almost immediately. So it does have a future because it's a great idea, it's a great catalyst, but we need much more honesty, less bullshit, and taking seriously this idea of legacy from the beginning. Yeah. So because the problem has been that a lot of attention to legacy in the bidding stage, and then an almost exclusive attention to delivery in the delivery stage, and legacy has been forgotten. Totally understandable, but I think wrong.